If you don't think the Doctor has always gotten political, you don't know them at all. What, you thought just because the rewatch is on pause and there aren't going to be new episodes for me to review for a bit that you weren't going to get Doctor Who content on here? Come on now. Have more faith in me than that. So this time I want to give my list for what I think are the 10 best political episodes of Doctor Who. A couple of things before we get started. First of all, every episode is political to some degree. Every piece of art is political to some degree. But I'm talking specifically about episodes that go in with a specific political outlook and point that they are attempting to make. Additionally, I am going to be ranking these more, or as much as I am able to, on how well I think they executed delivering the point that they were making. I am trying very hard to not let how much I agree with that political point be at the forefront, and I've actually got some episodes on here that I have a lot of issues with, but I still think they tackled that particular aspect well. Or to put it another way, just because I agree with the environmental message of Orphan 55, it's not going on this list. Oh, and if you take issue with the concept that Doctor Who isn't always has been political just in general, link there to a rather old video now, but I still stand by it that dissuades you of that idea. One last thing before we get started, bear in mind I am still filling in gaps in my knowledge of classic Doctor Who. As a result, this is going to be New Who heavy, though not exclusive, and there may well be some very good politically determined and minded episodes of the classic era that I just haven't seen yet and aren't on the list for that reason. So, all that having been said, let's get to it. Number 10, The Beast Below. It's funny to me that I decided to put this one on here because I actually am not a huge fan of this episode for a variety of reasons, none of which I'm actually really going to talk about right now. Because what I want to talk about instead is the manner in which it tackles the idea of the decisions and owning up to them. And to imagine a democratic system where, yes, the voters are deciding what happens, but they don't have to actually process the consequences of what it is they've chosen to do. If they've chosen to do something that maybe they do feel is the best decision, but is difficult, the fact that they had to make that choice at all is wiped from their memory. They don't have to actually grapple with the consequences of what their vote means. They just get to keep living. It gives a spotlight on blindness. And while it is obviously, as would be the point with pretty much any instance I'm going to be talking about, larger than life and exaggerated in a sci-fi fashion, it is making a pretty relevant point, which is you can't just vote because you think this will be best and then walk out of the voting booth and be like, I'm not going to think about that again. No, you have to. You have to grapple with the consequences. And if you don't, whether because you personally choose not to think anymore about it, or in a sci-fi situation, you literally can't remember, then you're not honoring the weight of having to make that choice in the first place. It's a well-made point in an episode that, again, I'm actually not that big a fan of, but this particular element, it's really good. Number 9. Demons of the Punjab. This one, I will grant, part of the reason it's on here is just for the sake of my own education. This is an aspect of real-life history that I don't have a great deal of knowledge of, and I found it incredibly helpful to have this perspective presented in a show like this. And I feel, again, in my uninformed opinion, it felt like it was presented respectfully because this is not a situation where, aliens manipulated it. They made it worse. They are somehow at the root of the problem. No, the problem is people. At its core, the issue is just the people. Aliens are there. We find out why. I think that's an interesting and well-done angle as well. A little bit reminiscent of Testimony from Twice Upon a Time, but I thought well handled. And it let the events and the impact of those events and the responsibility for those events to just land on the shoulders of human beings. because this was a decision made by human beings. These were consequences delivered by human beings. And there was pain suffered by human beings. I thought it was really well done. Number 8. The Enemy of the World. A Second Doctor story, and one that was actually lost for quite some time. This has some odd things going on in it. For starters, Patrick Troughton, the Second Doctor, also plays the villain in what looks like a little bit of brown face, so not in love with that. But ultimately, this is a story about manipulation and the dangers of the consolidation of power and influence. And it's not just critical of Salamander, who is the head villain. The people trying to take him down are also dangerous and lying and have their own agenda. Even in this exaggerated, preposterous future sci-fi situation, it doesn't forget that just because somebody is imposing someone who is bad doesn't mean that person is also good. It allows there to be nuance. It allows there to be complexity within a frankly ridiculous situation. It's well balanced, it's well handled, and it does a really good job of showing just the use of leverage and political power to get what you want and to maintain an image that has nothing to do with reality and the dangers of that. Number 7. The Rebel Flesh and the Almost People. I've always considered this two-parter to be underrated. I think it's really, really well done. Ultimately dealing with questions of personhood, but ultimately being applicable to just the treatment of workers. Because the flesh, because it's not seen as sentient and alive, is considered disposable. We use it for the job until it wears out, then we just get more. And the perspective on that is that the other people, the real people, are somehow inherently superior. They're not. The fact that they were here first gives them some kind of right or power over the flesh avatars. It doesn't. And dealing with opening these people's eyes to what it is they're doing, forcing them to see these beings that they just have seen only as tools for them to do their job as entities, as people, and to realize the damage that they are doing. Because any perspective on another living thing that views it only as a resource or a tool is inherently dehumanizing and harmful. And this, again, using a sci-fi lens, does a really good job of examining that. Number 6, the greatest show in the galaxy. I don't know how much of the political elements that I pulled out of this episode were deliberate. Maybe that's something I should have said at the start. I did not go out of my way to research the specific political intents behind these episodes, because in some cases, nothing has really been said by the writers or the makers. In other cases, they have said these things, but these were the readings that I had, and that's what I'm talking about. So, with the greatest show in the galaxy, which is a Seventh Doctor story, and it's about a circus, basically. Ultimately, everything going on, the pain, the death, is for the amusement of these gods who think they're above everything else, and that any other entity should either amuse them or be gotten rid of. And I, for one, do not think it is purely coincidental that prior to us seeing the true forms of these gods, they appear to just be a posh, upper-class, white family looking down on freaks and those they feel are beneath them, saying, "What is it that you offer us? Nothing? Oh, get rid of them." And then you have other elements. You have the manipulative nature of the relationship between two of these other characters. This sort of explorer, frankly, he looks like a colonial era explorer type, and the woman accompanying him, and realizing the painful, harmful, manipulative relationship that the two of them share. seeing the damaging way that people are tricked into being brought into this world for the amusement of beings that, again, don't see them as people. I thought it was surprisingly deep for an episode with some very goofy elements, but I like it. Number 5, Thin Ice. If you've seen some of my recent stuff on the 10th series of Modern Era Doctor Who, you should not be surprised to be seeing episodes from that series on here. Thin Ice, quite a bit like Demons of the Punjab, does a very good job of introducing sci-fi elements, but ultimately making it clear that the problem is people. There is an alien monster, but the monster is not the threat. The threat is the capitalist businessman who doesn't care about the collateral damage of anything that he does as long as it makes him money and that money-making process isn't threatened. He doesn't care if people die. He doesn't care what damage happens to the environment. He doesn't care about other people. He cares about lining his pocket with money. And he is the problem. The alien is just there. That is what he is using to do what he's doing. But this is the far end of the capitalist mindset. Does it generate profit? Good. Do it. But what about does it generate profit? Well, yeah, then do it. And setting it back in the Victorian era as it is helps remind us that this mentality and the possibility of taking things to a very, very harmful extreme is not a new problem. This is a baked-in problem that has existed for as long as capitalism has. And that's not to say that similar issues don't exist in other systems. I'm not here to have that debate. But it's not a new problem. It was there then. It's here now. And this episode does it nicely. Number 4, Genesis of the Daleks. Look, I'm not going to lie. I consider this an overrated story. But I cannot fault how absolutely crystal clear Terry Nation was in depicting the fascist mentality at the root of what the Daleks are, and the nihilistic desire to destroy everything that is not themselves at the heart of what they do. The Daleks have always been explicitly based on the Nazis. And the show has not been subtle about it up until this point. But this is the episode where you have no business claiming that you don't get that. To see the Khaled people, to see the military mindset that is already at work before Davros finishes building the Daleks, to see Davros himself, very much a Mengele figure, someone who does not care about the damage and who has a superiority complex that he thinks puts him above anyone else. And again, fails to acknowledge the humanity of other beings, fails to see them as people. The heart of the evil of the Daleks is fascism. And Genesis of the Daleks is about showing how the kernel of a fascism that, as depicted, very strongly resembles kinds that we have had in this world, in real life, led to the sci-fi monster that we all know. Now, is it saying fascism will literally build Daleks? No, but it is there to remind you that the Daleks came from these ideas and to implant them right in the heart of the Daleks so that every time they show up, you do not forget what they represent. It's important, it matters, and it was really well done. Number 3, Doctor Who and the Silurians, the accidentally named Third Doctor story. Now, there are a number of Third Doctor stories that I was considering, and including some that unfortunately I haven't seen yet that probably would have made the list under other circumstances. But I singled out this one because this is an excellent Cold War analog. The Silurians are a species that do have a claim to this planet and do not really want collectively a war with people, but they want what was taken. And there is this tension at the heart of it as some leaders within the Silurians want to find a way to coexist and cohabitate, while others say, just declare war, just wipe them out. And then on the flip side of that, UNIT, with its military approach, believing that, well, they're a danger, we should just kill them. And the Doctor trying to stop that, to not let that move forward, to prevent the slaughter. Now, at the time that it was made, the Cold War would have been the very clear analog, where within both sides, with the USSR and with the Western powers, you had people who very, very much wanted a war. You had other people within those same bodies that were doing everything they could to ensure that it did not ever come to that. And of course, in this story, ultimately, peace does not win. And it is treated as tragic as it should be. And this depiction is very applicable not only to the Cold War struggle, but any situation where the inherent tension between two groups is so high that you have battling within them those who want to find a peaceful way and those who want to just burn everything down. And to have those entities on both sides that just push everything into the worst possible outcome. Powerful then, powerful now. Good stuff. Number 2. Turn left. I don't know how many people think of this one as a political episode of Doctor Who, because it's largely treated as kind of an Elseworlds. It's a what if. It's an alternate timeline. And it is all those things. But the ways in which this timeline is different are deeply political. And especially if you have taken the time to get into, and I still haven't seen it, but I know enough of what it's about to know that Russell T Davies took a lot of the ideas here and reintroduced them again into his series Years and Years, which is deeply political. But they're here too. Because when the Doctor dies, and the threats that he was supposed to stop still come, it's not really about the damage those threats cause. What Left Turn is really about is the way the nation, in this case the UK, tears itself apart in the wake of bad events and does things that should not be done and using tragedies to justify them. It matters that when a family of immigrants is being carted away in a truck to a camp, a work camp, that Wilf, who was a veteran, sees them get packed in and driven off and says, "It's happening again." Because in trying times, when the world feels like it's coming apart, things that should not ever happen to some people start to look justified. It looks like a way to regain control when in reality, you are simply committing atrocities and things that should not happen. Again, treating people as something other than people. The dehumanizing and the messages about how a quote-unquote civilized society treats the most vulnerable of its populace when the chips are down and they want somebody to blame. It's hard to argue with the effectiveness and the political intent behind that. And finally, number 1, oxygen. I don't think too many people were expecting there to be anything else at the top. But oxygen is a fantastic episode with my favorite doctor, Peter Capaldi, from my favorite series of his run, Series 10. Like Thin Ice, this is a critique of capitalism, and it actually is a brilliant complement to Thin Ice, which looks at the past and how that mentality already existed back then, and then flings us into the far future and shows the extreme, technologically buoyed endgame of that mentality.
What your employers are telling them to do.
And what would that be?
Save the oxygen that you are wasting. You've become inefficient.
Once the workers are no longer productive enough, just kill them and bring in new ones. Everything is monetized. You have to earn your right to breathe. And people can claim that this is an absurd exaggeration, but even if it is, even if I were to grant that, which honestly, I'm not sure I would, but even if I do grant that, so what? Sometimes the best way to make a point is to take it to its logical extreme, to highlight the problems with that system, with that methodology, with that mindset. Highlight them at their most magnified and have people realize, okay, corporations aren't charging us to breathe, but they are charging us and controlling a great deal of vital resources we need to just live, and maybe to a greater extent than is good or healthy for anybody other than them. So even if you think this exaggeration is so far from the reality that that'll never happen, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if it would never happen, because the mentality behind the corporation that decides to just get rid of its workers when they aren't doing a good enough job, that mentality exists now. And even if it's not resulting in people suddenly having their oxygen taken away from them, it is at the heart, again, of capitalism, of large corporate mentality especially. And this, it does what socially conscious sci-fi is built to do. Take something going on, extrapolate it out to its most extreme in the future with foreign technology, and make it clear the problems that this blown up version is showing you are real now, even if on a smaller scale. I think it is a masterfully done piece of political entertainment, and it's my pick for the best political episode of Doctor Who. What are your picks for the best political episodes? Whatever they are, drop something down in the comments and let's talk about it. I've got a Patreon. There's a link up there. Rewards for every tier. You can see videos up to a week in advance. Also, you can get your name in the credits. You're going to start seeing those in just a minute. But even if you're not able to do that, there's also YouTube memberships with some other perks. But even if you can't do that, like, share, subscribe. Helps me out. Helps me battle the freaking algorithm. But even if you can't do that, it's okay. Because at the end of the day, you are the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.